there's a stranger staring at me in my rear view. Damned if he don't look a lot like me. Yeah, running tired and reckless, ain't no way to run at all. There ain't nothing like the thrill from a running free. Well, it's a good thing I left my heart in Texas.
Well, thank you for joining us today on the Tin Man Jack podcast. I've got a guest that I've been friends with for a long time. Got Brett Huston. Brett, thank you for joining us today. So we'll just dive right in. And as you know, the reason I'm doing this is kind of to shed light on what it's like to go through something in your life that you weren't expecting. And it's quite life-altering. In my instance, it was a heart attack, and we'll just dive right in. Why don't you tell us about the events that kind of have changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah, sure, Jack. So first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate being on the podcast. And
I'll just interject real quick and say that it's early on a Saturday morning right now. And we were just laughing earlier about how unlikely this scenario would have been, say, 10 years ago. Early on a Saturday morning, up doing something constructive. But anyway.
it would be more likely that we would still be up Saturday morning from the night before, about a decade ago. But with that being said, again, thanks for having me. And in my case, it actually really wasn't an unexpected event, because I was born with a bicuspid heart valve issue, in which I only have 2 valves instead of tricuspid. A normal person has 3. So in my case, because it was a congenital defect, they first really found out about it in a football physical, I think when I was in like 6th grade. A local doctor from my hometown, just a general practitioner, was performing a standard routine physical on me as a 6th grader, and thought he heard a heart murmur in addition to some other, I guess, issues. I don't recall the specifics of what he heard, but they sort of immediately referred me to Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh, whereby I underwent some testing, and they determined that I had a bicuspid heart valve.
Did you have to do anything about that immediately, or did you just?
Yeah, I think if memory serves me correctly, I'm 46 now, so we're talking, many years ago, over probably 30 some years ago. But when they sent me to Children's, it was relatively quickly, within a few months or something to that effect, and they had done some testing at the time, which certainly isn't as advanced as it is today. And that's sort of when they found the bicuspid issue. One of the initial issues that they were looking at even back then, and we're talking in the 80s, was the potential for open heart surgery at that time. And they felt comfortable based on some of the testing that I did that I had what they considered, back again, 30 some years ago, to be mild to moderate valve regurgitation, which is basically the amount of blood that your heart pumps out. Some of it regurgitates back when you have this with this issue, and they deemed it to be mild to moderate at that point in time. And again, it was 35 years ago or so.
One of those things where, especially in the 80s or whatever, just, you should be fine.
Yeah. They didn't, I mean, I'm sure they looked at various options in terms of, medications and things of that nature. And, even at that point in time, I think the mindset was that I was always probably going to have open heart surgery. I think in their view, I would probably have to have it much earlier than what I had it done, which was my first open heart surgery was in 2021, and my second one was in 2022. So.
Yeah, I remember specifically the day that kind of all of that unfolded for you, and 2021. Because if memory serves me correctly, we were supposed to go to DC the following day with another buddy to hang out for the weekend, and then I think we were leaving on a Friday maybe, and then that Thursday afternoon. Tell us.
Yeah,
what happened.
so that Thursday. So, you know, I had sort of very loosely treated for the condition for years. For instance, I followed up until about I was 22 or 23 yearly with a cardiologist. And then, of course, when you sort of get into your 20s and, you know, life starts to happen, and I just essentially stopped going. But really what led me to go to the emergency room was I was just, and this had been ongoing for months, probably several months, 3 to 6 months. I was very short of breath, sort of weak, noticed that my heart was sort of pounding quite a bit more. But it was primarily shortness of breath, and sort of started noticing I couldn't walk long distances, or if I walked upstairs, I was extremely short of breath, and just felt like a lot of stress kind of going on my heart, which led me to go in the emergency room, and they were immediately sort of concerned because I was actually in heart failure. Which obviously led to some of those symptoms when they saw me at the emergency room here in Pittsburgh initially.
And you were flown from where to where?
Yeah, so I was first seen in a local hospital, which was Upper St. Clair Hospital, and they essentially immediately sent me to vis-a-vis life flight to UPMC Presbyterian Hospital, which is sort of like a level 1 trauma unit here in Pittsburgh.
Do you remember anything about being on that flight?
Yeah, I mean, I remember everything. I mean, I was fully conscious. Obviously I was sort of scared in getting on the helicopter. They're taking your vitals and all that good stuff. It's the two things that I think I remember the most is, one, it was really, really, really hot inside of it, like surprisingly so. I think it was like
in July.
Yeah, and they said it was like 90 degrees or something like that. It's super hot inside of those sort of compartments inside the helicopter. And the other thing I remember is them wrapping me in sort of one of those tin foil blankets that you sometimes see people being given after fires and things of that nature. And I don't know why that was. Obviously there was some medical purpose behind it. But
for dramatic effect.
Yeah, but it was extremely hot, and it seemed like it helped the situation. I know, especially at the time, my blood pressure was like literally 234, 245 over something. So, that was, sort of adding to the stress of the event.
Yeah, that, people have asked me the same thing. Do you remember any of the events of when you were having a heart attack? And I do. I remember I was awake for the whole thing, other than, I was sedated when they put the stents in. But, I remember the way everything looked, the people who were in there, and just all these thoughts just racing. But, I was not on a helicopter, fortunately, because my heart probably would have jumped out of my chest.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of confined spaces or heights. So,
and nor am I. Yeah, I'm not a fan of heights at all. So I was not. In fact, I was sort of pleading with the emergency department at the time to just let me go via ambulance, because the two hospitals really aren't that far mileage-wise, distance-wise from one another. But the issue was, because my blood pressure was so high, they had administered a certain type of IV medication that needs to be closely monitored by a specific kind of nurse. And there's only a few ambulances that have those types of nurses in the city of Pittsburgh, apparently, or Allegheny County, and they were all full. So it was really because they needed a specialized staff member to monitor my blood pressure in combination with the medicine they gave me, which is why I had to end up taking a helicopter.
Now, how long? I remember going to visit you in the hospital, but you were there for an extended amount of time. How long was that?
Yeah, so I was actually in the hospital, and this was in 2019, I believe, for like 12 days or 14 days. And in fact, it's crazy because I was in the hospital almost double the amount of time when I was in heart failure versus the 2 open heart surgeries that I underwent. The first open heart surgery, I was out of the hospital, I think, in 3 days. The second one, I was out in like a week. So I was in there quite a bit longer. And part of that was there were a multitude of issues. I had untreated high blood pressure for probably, 46 years, or 43 years at the time. Yeah. I had some kidney damage because of that untreated high blood pressure. And there was also an issue that they were trying to figure out, because my blood pressure would actually become normal at rest. So my resting blood pressure when I was sleeping would be absolutely normal. When I would wake up, it would literally shoot to over 200. And that is abnormally rare. And they actually thought that I may have had a tumor on my kidney that was causing that. So that caused some additional testing, blah, blah, blah. One of the doctors at Presbyterian Hospital, UPMC Presbyterian, said that he had read about it at Harvard or something, but he had never seen someone that actually had the condition. And so they were really doing a lot of testing on me to see if I had that or not. Thankfully, I didn't. But I would have probably had to have undergone surgery right then and there to have that taken care of.
Yeah, being in the hospital, I was not in that long, but I was in ICU, and I remember they wouldn't let Amy, my wife, stay overnight. And so I think like that initial night I was in there alone kind of started this cascade of like anxiety and worry that like really kind of built for about, I'd say, 2 years before I kind of got a handle on things. And I can only imagine being in the hospital for a couple of weeks like that. I know there were times when you were in there by yourself and your thoughts were probably just all over the place. Do you remember anything specific that you were particularly worried about? Or
I mean, I tend to agree with you that especially I think initially I had some anxiety and just candidly scared because again you didn't really know what was going on, and the heart surgeons that were evaluating me at UPMC Presbyterian at the time were sort of checking different things, and they were talking about the type of surgeries, and they were saying that it was going to have to be a double valve surgery, which I did end up having. And that they were going to give me sort of a mechanical aortic root. So sort of a complicated procedure. So when you start hearing, how complicated things and complex they potentially could be, the more sort of worry sets in. But with that being said, I think that was like my initial reaction. And yeah, you certainly, don't sleep well and all those sorts of things. I think part of that is just inherently being in a hospital, and nurses waking you up at all hours of the night and taking your blood and giving you medication and things of that nature. But certainly I think a component of that was anxiety for sure.
Yeah, it's, I don't know. It's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't been in that position. But how did you, I know you didn't end up having surgery at the hospital that you were in. How did you go about deciding you went to the Cleveland Clinic? Is that?
Yes. So it was just serendipity or by chance. And not that I was displeased with any of the care that I received at UPMC. The surgeons that were seeing, the cardiothoracic surgeons that were seeing me there, were, and probably are some of the best doctors in their field, as well. But the doctor that was scheduled to do my surgery was actually traveling to Italy for his summer vacation. And rightfully so. And I'm thankful they did it. They wanted to make sure that I was in a more stable condition after being in heart failure before opening me up. So his basic thought process was, I'm going to go on vacation. When I get back in 14 days or whatever it was, we're probably going to go right into surgery then, but let's get you stable, let's get you normalized, etc. Again, thankfully for me, I really stabilized to a place where I thought that they ended up doing some more testing. We ended up being able to I think thoughtfully go through different options with the surgeons, as opposed to having it done in an emergency basis where you don't really get to make the call or have a choice.
That's a good point.
Those guys, just open you up. So I ended up, sort of performing some research on my own, right, talking to folks, and ultimately I really just went to Cleveland to get a second opinion to ensure that, the surgery that UPMC was recommending was something that they were in agreement with.
Well, so you've had 2 open heart surgeries,
yes,
since 2021.
Yes.
Kind of tell me about those. Like, what was your experience with going through the process and then healing up, and any kind of pitfalls along the way?
Yeah. So I had my first surgery on March 23rd or 20. I think it was March 23rd of 2021. And when I was seen by Dr. Gillenov, is the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. So I'd initially sent them my records. His sort of staff reviewed it, and he called me and sort of gave me the plan of what they were going to do. And so my first surgery actually involved 2 separate cardiothoracic surgeons doing 2 separate and distinct parts of the open heart procedure. One replacing my aortic valve, and Dr. Gillenov, who's a mitral valve specialist, actually repaired my mitral valve because lucky for me, I was also born with mitral valve prolapse as well. So he repaired my mitral valve, and they replaced my aortic valve with a cow valve initially.
So, and were you given the option of a mechanical valve versus a pig or cow?
Yeah. So first surgery, they cannot. I don't think, and I could be wrong on this. I'm sure there's probably a doctor out there that might correct me, but I don't. With your aortic valve, I don't think there is a mechanical valve aspect to that. There may be, but there certainly is with the mitral valve. The mitral valve is a little bit more complex, my understanding, of a valve to work on in repair. So I lucked out. Dr. Gillenov, literally, is my understanding, has performed the most mitral valve surgeries of anyone in the world. The doctor that replaced my aortic valve had done more aortic valve placements than any doctor in the world. So I felt comfortable that, I was with the folks that have done it the most and seen it the most.
Yeah, man, if you're going to be in the situation that you were in, that I can't imagine a more ideal, reassuring setting to be in. But I guess one question I have is, since you received that valve, do you have cloven hooves now?
That's what I always tell people when I eat a cheeseburger. I'm a cannibal, like Hannibal Lecter, but no, no. And then the second operation that I had in June 23rd of 2022, unfortunately, the mitral valve repair that was performed the first time around, it actually failed. And I ended up having to get that replaced. It's very rare. Again, Dr. Gillenov's a fantastic person, first of all, and a fantastic surgeon. So by no means his fault that, there just is a failure rate with those things. And unfortunately, it kind of just didn't pan out for me. So I had to end up getting that mitral valve replaced as well.
So what's some advice that you would give to somebody who's maybe facing a procedure like that? Both from perspective of what does it feel like when you're out of the surgery? Like, what does the whole situation look like?
Yeah. and I think that's a good question because it is hard to explain. The first thing I will say about open heart surgery generally, now I know everybody has a different pain tolerance, but we come from a long line of bad hearts in the Houston family. So my dad actually also had open heart surgery, and so did his mother. And she had her open heart surgery, believe it or not, in like 1982. Wow. It was very, very early. She was in San Diego and she had a heart attack. Now, their surgeries were for different reasons. They basically had clogged arteries. But the first thing my dad said when I asked him, what's open heart surgery like? He's like, honestly, it doesn't really hurt that much. And that is true. Now, that may be because you're, still coming out of anesthesia, being under anesthesia. But you really, it's not that painful. The thing that I remember the most, particularly from the first open heart surgery, was when I went to stand up, one of the attending nurses, and they were great there, offered to assist me out of the bed. And I basically said flatly, I don't really need your assistance. I can get up on my own. And excuse me, when I went to get up, I was very, very weak. It is sort of humbling how weak that surgery can make you. You lose almost all muscle mass. At least I feel like I did, and it's been hard to even remotely regain, I feel like. But you're just very, very weak for sort of a couple weeks after.
Yeah, I remember in a much different scenario, but after I got out of the hospital, my mom came up to Pittsburgh from Tennessee to kind of help me out. And one day she suggested that we go just on a walk around the block. And I legitimately made it probably like 30, 40 yards, and I just couldn't go anymore. And this is like, I've never experienced anything like that in my life, like any something that would just hamstring my ability to do anything physical, like the simplest thing of walking down the sidewalk. And so that was one of the things, like just a recurring worry that I had, like, is this what my life is reduced to? Already at the time, 37 years old, having had a heart attack, got hearing aids. It's like a little old man in a 37-year-old body. But I don't know, that was just something that I struggled with, and eventually got better. And I've been able to do anything I want without any limitations now. But how's that gone for you?
Yeah, I think the same sort of scenario. I think there's a part of, particularly after you have open heart surgery, of not wanting to get up and move around. And I think that's probably the worst thing you can do. I really listened to my surgeon's advice and the cardiologist's advice, which is, they want you up and moving relatively quickly after that surgery. Like, in
what capacity? Like,
yeah, particularly again on the first surgery, I remember them. This was in like 24 hours of the surgery, and I remember the nurses coming in and saying, if you want to get moved from the ICU unit to the step down unit, you have to go over and touch the doorknob of that door. And at the time, that seemed like, it was 10 football fields away, and it seemed like it was miserable. But you do it, and you sort of, they keep you on, they have different occupational therapists and physical therapists there that sort of help you kind of begin to walk, and you sort of start down the hallway, and then you start walking half of the hospital floor that you're on, and then the full floor, and then you do 2 full floor trips. So you're certainly weak, but I found that if you kind of push yourself a little bit, ultimately I think you end up having better results.
Yeah, in that regard, I did. I tell everyone this who's gone through something like this. Cardiac rehab really did save me from a physical and mental perspective. It did just wonders for me. It was kind of a funny situation because I don't know if this is generally how it is. I'm guessing probably so. The average age is pretty high. So I brought that average down quite a bit, but I met a lot of people who were significantly older than me that had gone through one thing or another and were trying to get back on their feet. but they were, I found them to be very encouraging, and they would share their stories with me and vice versa. And so it was, I don't know, just went a long way. And I recommend that anybody look into that. Is that something you did after?
Recommended, but I did not do. Really, I started just doing a lot of walking on my own. And again, it started from when I got out of the hospital for both surgeries, really, to start walking around the downstairs floor, right?
Yeah.
And then sort of going outside in the yard and walking from one end of the yard to the other, and then starting in the street in my neighborhood and walking, down to X house and using that as your goal. And so I think, as a former athlete, good, bad, or indifferent, I think when you go through something like this, it's very important to be able to compartmentalize things too,
Right.
and have goals. And, like I said, you set various goals for yourself. I want to walk to this house today. Tomorrow I'm going to try to get to that house. And you don't want to overexert yourself and make throw your recovery off by any stretch. But I think if you have some reasonable goals, in conjunction with, kind of focusing and trying to compartmentalize, when I'm at work, even though I might not be feeling well, I'm going to work. And when I'm at home, spending time with my family, I'm going to focus on that. I think that was really helpful in the whole process.
Yeah, you mentioned walking, and at the time I lived a couple of blocks away from, I think it's about the oldest park in Pittsburgh, and I would just, eventually I got to where I was able to walk there, and then I'd walk through the park, and it gave me a lot of time to just think. And what was funny is I could see the hospital where I went when the whole thing happened, so it was just kind of like, it was a weird experience, but each day I was just able to walk a little bit further, and you kind of collect your thoughts, gives you some time to kind of just evaluate everything. And so I recommend that to anyone. Don't just stay in bed, even though it might seem like the easiest thing to do. Probably the worst thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And from a recovery, and I think a physical recovery standpoint, the surgeons, I mean, they want you on your feet and moving. It's to get fluid off, to get the blood flowing into your heart, right, etc. But I agree that, Jack, that mentally too, you can certainly get to, not very good headspaces, I think sometimes. I think probably the worst time for me, or, the most sort of quote unquote depressing time for me, was probably, when I found out they were going to have to do a second open heart surgery. That was a little bit, I was down for a couple days on that because I was hoping that they wouldn't have to go through my chest again. But unfortunately, because of where the mitral valve sits, it's really the only way that they can get through or get to them. I shouldn't say the only way. There apparently are other ways, but to have it replaced, it's apparently very difficult to do other than vis-a-vis open heart surgery.
I have a pretty rudimentary understanding of that whole process, but am I correct that they cut your sternum and
they
go in?
I started Googling, of course, before the first surgery, to see what it entailed, and really reading different articles, whether it be the clevelandclinic.com articles about open heart surgery, or about, University of Michigan and all these different places. And I think it's a delicate balance, because I think you could also go down sort of a dark hole.
Yeah, I agree.
There, but I think you also want to be informed, right?
Yeah,
like you want to know what's going on. You want to be able to ask the right questions. Yep. You want to try to understand and get some sort of, information and education about what's going to go on, what's my recovery look like, how's life going to be afterwards. So I think it's important to be informed, but, I often...
By the right sources. Yes,
right. The right sources. And, I don't think you want to overly focus on it either, because, if, for instance, I know one of the things that I read about open heart surgery, and forgive me for anyone out there that's getting ready to have it, that really threw me for a loop, is, they actually take your heart out of your chest.
Is that right?
Yes. And they put it on a sort of a table, and they freeze your heart with some sort of injection. And that's how they end up working on it. So,
and I had no idea that was.
And I may be speaking very loosely about sort of how it's done. And again, experts would know much more than I. But yeah, that was like a little bit of a shocker. So I didn't want to read too much about the procedure itself.
Right.
I just wanted to make sure that like I had the right questions to be able to ask and feel comfortable.
Now, what does it feel like, and how long do you feel like how do they fuse your?
Yeah, I think they use some sort of wire.
Does it rub together?
Metal wire? No, I don't know. I don't know, to be honest.
You couldn't.
No, I still can't really feel anything. You know, the only sort of limitation I think is sometimes you can feel a little wonkiness if you put your hands up over your head. If you, for instance, if I reach for a high plate or something like that, I can feel it. But other than that, I can't really feel, anything internally they did. Now, I do, I don't think especially when you undergo it twice, like, I don't think your breastbone is ever the same because they saw through your
right.
breastbone entirely. And so, I don't think it's ever going to feel normal. I do have I think a tendency to sort of be hunched over from it, which is weird. And they say that can happen because once you have trauma to your chest like that, even though it's surgery, a lot of people tend to kind of hunch their shoulders over as a protective mechanism.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
I think like, I find myself sometimes sitting like this instead of sort of being more upright. And I think that might be related to the surgery, but ill effects from like any actual devices or anything like that, really nothing. I have 2 medical cards that I carry with me because I have so much metal in my chest, I guess, for various things. So that if I ever got stopped at an airport or whatever the case may be, I can show them those cards.
So what's the prognosis as far as like when someone has a surgery or surgeries like you had, is that something that you have to kind of they have to go in and like reconfigure anything at any certain intervals, or is it just hopefully it's one and done?
Yeah. So, sort of a good question and in my situation, probably a little bit more complex one than for most people that would undergo standard open heart surgery. My dad, for instance, had open heart surgery at the age of 52 in 2003 or 2004, maybe. And has never had anything done. His surgery went fine. He's, on, again, he had triple bypass. So a little bit different of a surgery, but he's never had anything done again. In my case, the aortic valve will end up basically, disintegrating is not the right term, but it will eventually over time, probably fail. The mitral valve eventually over time will probably need work done to it as well. Now, aortic valve repairs or replacements, because both of mine are organic. I have and organic's not the right term, but they're biovalves. I have a cow aortic valve, but I have a pig mitral valve.
Got a barnyard in there.
I can't eat, ham or hamburger. But those will, in all likelihood, both need to be surgically either repaired or replaced in some manner. When that is, only the good Lord knows. Generally, the aortic valve lasts a lot longer than the mitral valve, particularly in older people. The mitral valve my understanding, it can range. It's a wide range, but it can range from anywhere from 8 years to 22 years. The mitral valve is much shorter. Generally speaking, it can range from 5 years to, I think Dr. Gillenhoff said 17 years was the most he'd ever seen one last. So I will probably need work done at some point, hopefully, and I think the goal when I had both of these valves replaced is that, medicine will be advanced as such.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have the benefit of all those years in between for all the advances that you would benefit from.
For sure. You know, for instance, if I would have had open heart surgery as a kid, and not that they were recommending that in any sense, but, you know, in 1980s, things have changed a lot to when I actually had my surgeries. So, you know, in one sense, I'm really glad. I probably waited too long to have it done, but I'm glad that, you know, I was a product of sort of modern medicine, so to speak. But yeah, they will both have to get worked on. You know, I think most people, as far as the mitral valve, probably would have got a mechanical valve.
Right.
And if you get a mechanical valve as related to the mitral valve, that'll last forever, essentially. Ideally, it should last forever. But the downside of that is you have to be on Coumadin. And so, you know, given my lifestyle, so to speak, and being relatively young, I just did not, and I think you and I had talked about that.
Yeah, I remember that was
I just did not want to be on Coumadin. So, you know, that was sort of a personal choice. And, you know, for good, bad, or indifferent, I'll have to deal with that choice somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But Dr. Gillenov felt comfortable enough to, you know, give me a mitral valve replacement that was a biovalve instead of a mechanical valve. And so I ended up sort of choosing that route. Can't look back on it now. You know, if 2 years from now the mitral valve goes shot and I have to get work done, unfortunately you can't look back on it. But, you know, I think that was the best choice for me at the time. And so that's where we are there.
Right. It's different. Like, you know, that you can kind of look at a timeline of, you know, on average, these valves last this long. And in my case, it's just kind of one of those things where, like, the only thing I can do is just take the medicine that I'm supposed to, kind of try to stay in shape, cross my fingers. And, you know, my goal, I've got a goal, it's to hit 82. And I don't know how feasible that is, but in my mind it is, and that's where I'm headed. But it's funny, I used to, prior to having children, I think my worries were different. It was like almost on a daily basis. It's like, is this going to happen again? And now the worry has shifted from myself. Like, I'll give you a good example. This past summer, I took Leo, my son, to Chicago. We went to a Pirates-Cubs game, and I hadn't thought this scenario. It had never occurred to me until one night we're in the hotel room. He's asleep, and I'm watching TV. And it just kind of dawned on me. It's like, what if something happened to me when, you know, it's just the two of us? And he was 6 at the time. He's 7 now. But it was like, what is, as a 6-year-old, what situation does that leave them in? So I think my worries are different than they were a long time ago as far as an outlook. But I still try to just kind of keep my eyes on the horizon rather than just worry about every little thing. And well, I know that things have probably changed for you because, and congratulations, you've become a dad recently.
Yeah.
How has your outlook changed as a result of becoming a parent?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I agree with sort of everything that you've said there in terms of your outlook. You know, I am by nature, I think, a big believer in that you can only sort of worry about the present, and that's today.
Yeah, that's a lot how I've, you know, I didn't always feel that way, and now I try to make the most of every day. Don't just take things for granted. And sorry to cut you off.
No.
I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah, no. So, you know, I really think you can only worry about the present, with the caveat now that, you know, it does cross my mind on occasion, certainly having a little girl now, that, oh boy, like if I do need to get this surgery, like, and what I think about is like, is she going to be scared? How old will she be?
Yeah.
I don't want her to be scared. So it's more, I think, my thoughts go to, you know, limiting any sort of worry or anxiety and being around for her, right? Like that's probably the biggest thing. Is that when you have a child and that you want to be there for them as they grow through life. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing you think about in that situation. But again, I try to, and I've always sort of been that way, I try to focus on the present. Let's worry about today. What do we have to do today? And then we can kind of fixate and focus on tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think for people who are going through a situation or might be in kind of a dark spot as a result of something like this you've gone through, or maybe even unrelated to a health situation, just like a life-altering instance that you're trying to figure out where you are in life and how to get back on track. But I think it's just important, as you noted, to just kind of live in the present. And, otherwise you're wasting too much time thinking about yesterday or thinking about tomorrow. So just look at what's right in front of you. And that's my biggest piece of advice to someone, even though that might sound kind of generic. I think it's a very helpful thing to do.
Yeah. I wholeheartely agree, that when you go through sort of a life-altering experience, which I think both of our experiences are, and a lot of people, dealing with health issues, or like you said, it could be someone that was involved in in an accident or something
Right.
else. But again, if you can sort of compartmentalize, and so I try not to worry about the future, because if I get caught up in worrying about it, the worries become, when's my mitral valve going to fail? What's surgery going to look like for that?
You're on the dark web looking for a pig valve.
Exactly. Am I going to have open heart surgery again? Are they going to be able to do something less invasive? And so, you're speculating about something you're not, sure is even going to occur. So I try not to do that. It's hard sometimes, and I think it naturally, as a human being, you think those things, but I try to limit my thought process, on those sorts of things.
Yeah, I agree. Something in the background here just caught my eye, and this little stack of books right here, I think I've got 6 of them, but I don't know if anybody, they were younger, read these. Brett, you want to fill us in on what these are here?
Well, it looks to be the Hardy Boys, books of the Hardy Boys.
The Hardy Boys series.
Yes.
And my reading level is higher than this, but I remember when I was going through the recovery process initially, I read so much, and I started reading these also because they're so fast, and it kind of reminded me, it took me back to a point when I was a kid, when I didn't really have any worries. And plus, if you read these, it's really funny the way the grammar is in it. It's highly recommend those. So I would say things that got me through the whole recovery process, in a nutshell, I would say, my wife, my family, my friends, the Hardy Boys, Golden Girls, and beta blockers. So, and a lot of walking. And so I don't know, how would you sum up, if you're talking directly to someone who is facing what you did, what questions should they ask? And as far as from the time you're on the table getting surgery to a place where you're back on your feet, like what would you say that time frame was for you? How many weeks? Or
that's I'm an attorney by trade, so that's what's called a compound question, because there's multiple questions in one question. But so I would object to that if we were in court or in a deposition. But with that, let me take that in sort of a couple parts. So in terms of I'll take the last part first. In terms of surgery, from sort of when you're on the table and they split you open, so to speak, until I felt I was back on full-fledged feet again, I would say 2 months.
Yeah.
I went back each time within about 30 days. I probably felt 85% when I went back to work. Now, admittedly, I don't have a heavy labor job. I basically sit at a desk. So I think that could be, in terms of going back to work, that could be different for different people, depending on their recovery. But generally speaking, I think like 2 months was roughly when I started to feel like myself again. And I will say this, when you have that surgery and you are fixed, so to speak, I realized immediately how bad I felt compared to how
I can
good
imagine.
I feel now.
I remember being surprised at how quickly you were back at work.
Yeah, and again, you don't realize when you're sometimes I think when you're sick how sick you really are, right? And you don't realize how your heart's not working properly until they sort of quote unquote fix it.
Right.
And then you realize, holy cow, like I'm not short of breath doing this. And, I can go upstairs multiple times and I don't feel any burning in my legs and things of that nature. And I think subconsciously would recognize those things, but I wasn't consciously recognizing them. But then when you sort of have treatment or surgery and things of that nature that, hopefully alleviate whatever health issue that you're undergoing, boy, it makes a world of difference when it works out well and you feel a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm just glad that we're both sitting here.
Yeah, me too, for sure. And then the other part of your question, I think, was like support system and
right.
Who you sort of relied on for that. Certainly, my wife was a primary caregiver for me, and God bless her. She had to do it twice, and believe me, I am not the easiest patient to deal with in the world. So, kudos to her. And it's, I will say, in my opinion, open heart surgery is not a very easy surgery on a spouse or a caregiver or anything, or anyone that may be helping you through your journey, because you are so weak initially, and you sort of need care for sure.
The prolonged nature of it too.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. And so my wife was great. My family, supported me and was fantastic, and friends as well. So, I was lucky enough to have a good support system in terms of that.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on today and talking with me. So I'm sure we'll recap a lot of this maybe later tonight. Who knows? But I think Brett's a prime example of someone that can kind of give hope to anybody going through or potentially going through open heart surgery or any kind of surgery where there's an extended recovery period. So I wanted to bring him on. Really glad that he was able to share his story. There's some couple of details that I didn't know, so I'm glad to fill in those gaps. Anyway, I just think it's important for people to, if you're going through something, remember, just be in the present. Try not to focus too much on yesterday or tomorrow, and wish you the best of luck in your recovery, and hope you'll continue to tune in, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks Jack for having me. Appreciate it.
There's a stranger staring at me in my rear view. Damned if he don't look a lot like me. Yeah, running, tired and reckless, ain't no way to run at all. There ain't nothing like a thrill from a running free. Well, it's a good thing I left my heart in Texas.